Welcome to People and Profit, where we look at how business shapes our world. This week, the Brexit countdown. As the days tick down until Britain formally begins leaving the EU, we look at how the UK economy has fared since last year's referendum. Preparing for life without London, we speak to the EU's markets regulator about the loss of the bloc's major financial hub. And churning unease in the UK among cheesemakers, fearful of losing EU protection for their uniquely British products. First up, though, the United Kingdom is set to begin the process of leaving the European Union any day now. It will have just 2 years to resolve complicated issues like the UK's access to the single market and the status of EU citizens living in Britain. It's an uncertain time for businesses and the economy. If the negotiations appear to go badly, the pound and share markets are likely to suffer. So far, the UK seems to have escaped any major economic upset because of Brexit, but that could change, as Shirley Sitman explains.
More than 8 months have passed since the Brexit shock vote. Since then, the value of the pound has plunged. It's lost around a sixth of its value since June. Weak sterling makes British industries more competitive, unless they import raw material, which is now more expensive, pushing production costs and prices up. But those who pleaded for Britain's exit are still enthusiastic.
We have the IMF predicts that we'll have the fastest growing economy for 2016. We have the fastest G7 economy, though we didn't until last year, where they slightly changed the figures, like rather the Oscar ceremony. Now, Germany seems to have scooped it for the time being, but we're right up there.
An optimistic tone that's shared on stock markets. London's benchmark FTSE 100 index has risen by more than 10% since the day of the referendum. There are warnings, though, of trouble ahead.
There is a real risk that the outcome will fall well below the hopes and expectations that have been raised. Regrettably, I see little chance that we'll be able to match the advantages of the single market in the negotiations to come.
While those negotiations get underway, it may be British consumers who feel the effect of Brexit next. The Bank of England expects inflation to rise above 2% before the end of the year.
Key to the negotiations will be the status of London's financial services hub. Kate Moody's been looking at what's at stake there. Kate.
Stephen, the City of London is a major moneymaker for the UK. The banks and financial services based there represent about 12% of the country's GDP. The Bank of England counts 390,000 people working in London's financial industry at 5,500 firms. But 30,000 jobs could be at risk post-Brexit, according to the think tank Bruegel. Other estimates put the potential losses even higher. Much of that hinges on what kind of deal will be negotiated. Leaving the single market almost certainly means an end to passporting, which allowed financial services firms licensed in the UK to operate throughout the EU, as well as in Norway and Iceland. London could get a lifeline to the continent if regulators deem British rules equivalent to Europe's, but that's not a sure thing. The UK will also fight to maintain its spot as a hub of financial clearing, or helping to transfer cash among corporations, and specifically derivatives that are priced in euros. Since the referendum, tech giants Google and Facebook have announced plans to expand in the UK, while carmaker Nissan committed to its UK production plants. All firms likely hoping that the corporate tax rate will be lowered. But big banks, including HSBC, UBS and JP Morgan Chase, have confirmed that they'll each shift between 1,000 and 4,000 jobs away from London. Lloyd's of London Insurance and the European Banking Authority are also looking for new office space. Paris, Dublin, Frankfurt and Luxembourg are all still vying for that new business. Language, tax rates and ease of operation will all be factors. French campaigners have even injected a touch of humor into their slogan, hoping to turn national cliches into concrete gains. Stephen?
Kate, thank you very much. What a jolly-looking frog. Anyway, aside from trying to woo companies from London, there are frenzied preparations underway elsewhere in Europe for the UK's departure. In Paris, the European Securities and Markets Authority is charged with maintaining financial stability in the EU. It's advised listed companies to flag up the potential impact of Brexit to their business. But with the continent's major financial hub set to leave the European Union, its job is about to get a lot more complicated. Well, to talk about this further, I'm joined in studio by Stephen Mayor, who's the chairman of the European Securities and Markets Authority. Thank you for coming in to speak to us. How is your organisation preparing for Brexit?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to the program. I think there are different areas where ESMA prepares for Brexit. We are the European Securities and Markets Regulator, and so various elements of our work and of our organisation are affected by Brexit. One key element is and the first key element is the fact that some of the London market participants are considering to relocate to one of the EU 27, to continental Europe. And we need to make sure that when they're doing that, that is done against the same standards across the various financial centres in the EU 27. We know that financial centres in the EU 27 are trying to attract some of this activity, which is fine. If they compete on the basis of efficiency, that is all fine. But of course, it needs to be done on the basis of the same robust regulatory and supervisory standards.
And are you seeing fierce competition among those countries already? Is that an issue that you're seeing highlighted?
Well, obviously, the UK market participants are talking to various regulators. They inform themselves about the possibilities. That is a very, understandable and a process that you can expect. But what is very important is that the EU 27 national regulators have a common understanding about what is possible, how thorough the supervision should be, what the interpretation of rules and regulations should be when UK market participants come to one of these EU 27 financial centres. And that is the reason that we have now started to work with my board, with the national regulators, on identifying the most important topics where we need to have a common understanding to avoid, as we call it, regulatory or supervisory competition.
As the markets regulator in the EU, what's your biggest concern about the EU losing its biggest financial hub, London, to something that will be outside the European Union?
It is extremely important for the EU 27 to continue with the so-called Capital Markets Union. That is a program that was already established some time ago by the EU, which is about improving the functioning of capital markets in the EU. As you are aware, we in the EU are very much relying on the banks and within the financial system. And so we need to strengthen that program, go forward with that program, as especially continental Europe is more reliant on the banking system.
You talked about some of those UK participants wanting to move to continental Europe. There will still be an awful lot of them in the UK after Brexit. How will that change how EU rules are applied to them when they're outside the EU?
Well, as we call it, we have within the EU already a long tradition of what we call third country policies. A country outside the EU is called a third country. And so we have, depending on the specific area in financial services, we have arrangements for those countries outside the EU that want to provide services within the EU. And obviously that is very relevant for the situation of the UK. And so-called equivalent systems. In some parts of the financial system we have them, in some pieces of financial legislation, but in other parts it's not. Sometimes we hear these stories about equivalence. It is very important to realize is that what equivalence precisely means depends on area by area. It's different for asset managers than it is, for example, for derivatives.
There was an article published by the think tank Bruegel recently saying that your organisation needs to be beefed up to be ready for Brexit. What did you make of that argument?
Well, we have in the past already said at various stages, and is that ESMA needs to have stronger powers. We have made a very big step in 2011 when ESMA was established in response to the financial crisis. The plan for a bigger capital market in the EU also requires, of course, a better supervisory system. If you want to have a better functioning capital market, if you really want to have a capital market union, you need to have strengthened powers to supervise those markets. Bigger markets means bigger risks. That is an issue both at the EU level, but also at the national level.
Okay, Stephen Mayor from the European Securities and Markets Authority, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for being here.
Now, back in the UK, the impact of Brexit may even be felt on the kitchen table. Leaving the EU means that British delicacies from cider to cheese could lose their protected status and open the door for copycat manufacturers. Britain's Agriculture Ministry has yet to outline a programme to replace the EU protections, and farmers are anxious to preserve their livelihood.
Single Gloucester cheese, moist, smooth and delicious. A British delicacy, protected under European law. Only cheese made here in the county can carry the label Single Gloucester. But what will happen to this status, known as Protected Designation of Origin or PDO, as Brexit edges closer?
I don't know what will happen about the PDO. I can't believe the government won't do something to sort of replace a British version of it. I'm sure they will. They'd be crazy not to.
Charles also believes common sense will prevail when it comes to the status of the European workers on which his farm relies. Justina and Daniela have both been making cheese here for more than 10 years. They may be from Poland and Bulgaria, but they're committed to making the best of British.
Seeing how people see our cheese and the love for it, so it's nice. In a big factory, I don't think I'll be able to do that. I'll be on a line or somewhere.
Britain boasts 77 protected products, and the Department for the Environment says it wants to maintain the UK's reputation as a great food nation.
If the producer goes to the limits of doing what he does to such a good standard, it's nice to protect those standards, isn't it?
Single Gloucester.
A no-brainer then, a UK register of protected foods to replace the EU's. But experts say that will take legislation and reciprocal overseas agreements. If the question of food protection